Hey everyone, it's Allie, and as we're getting closer to Path of Exile 2, we inevitably started theory crafting with my community on Twitch, and today I want to present you one of the build concepts that we've come up with for the release of Path of Exile 2. I want to preface this by saying that we have no idea if this will be good or not. I'm not trying to say that this will be a good build or a bad build. It could be either or. It's just that with my 8,000 hours of experience in PoE 1, we identified all the things that we're going to be putting together in this video as something that is coherent, is synergistic, and makes sense as a possible build. This video is meant to be a way for me to plant a seed in your head about the concept and to give you some guidance if you want to attempt to play something like this, as I've seen plenty of people ask me for recommendations on what I think could potentially work in PoE 2 and what I'd be playing personally. This is a build I'm highly interested in, which is weird to say given I've never played melee before and I don't like playing melee, but this build seems so cool that it even has piqued my interest, and I'll most likely be trying it in full at some point in the first few weeks of PoE 2. What we're going to be talking about today is going to be a Warcry Warbringer, where we're going to be playing with the Corrupting Blood support that makes all of our Warcries apply Corrupting Bloods to enemies around us. This gem has gone a glow up from PoE 1 to where it now has an inherent scaler with your strength, meaning that we could potentially scale this substantially harder than we would have ever been able to in PoE 1. And the one thing that could potentially be holding this build back is that all Warcries have a cooldown attached to them, but our Ascendancy that we're going to be playing for this build, Warbringer, allows us to pick up Great Wolf's Howl, which will completely allow you to ignore Warcry cooldown, allowing us to spam our Warcry as fast as we can, which is important for this build, as with Corrupting Blood, we can stack it up to 10 times, meaning we would need to be able to use a lot of Warcries to realistically get the most out of this build. Warbringer is going to offer you some other interesting points as well. Warcaller's Bellow, which you'll have to pick before Great Wolf's Howl, makes it so all the corpses of enemies near you just explode, and given its fizz damage, and we're going to be probably scaling some generic percent fizz damage, should make it so these explosions do enough to kill the rest of the pack as soon as you kill one or two monsters in it. We also get Jade Heritage, which I think is probably one of the single best skills going into PoE 2, given all of us are going to be completely new to the game. There's going to be a lot of bosses. They're going to be very hard. We're not going to know what we're doing. And just having a button that straight up allows you to completely be immune to damage while you're inside of it is probably going to be one of the best things that you can have for launch. We don't know what we'd be spending our fourth point on Warbringer yet, as we don't have enough info on Warbringer, but I'm sure there'll probably be something in here that would make sense and synergize with what we're trying to do here. The other really cool thing about this build that I think is going to be very unique is that we're going to be playing with a passive called Giant's Blood. This is going to allow you to equip a two-handed weapon as a one-handed, which is going to give you substantially more stats than a one-hander ever would. And this then allows you to also equip a shield at the same time, giving you another defensive layer, as with your shield, you can raise it up to have 100% block chance, which effectively gives you damage immunity from the front for a few seconds. The downside of Giant's Blood being that your weapon requires double the attributes to equip wouldn't really be an issue for us, given that with the Corrupting Blood support, we want to stack strength to scale it, meaning that we'll very easily reach the attribute requirements to actually be able to equip our two-handed weapon. As for the rest of the passage tree and how we want to put this together, ideally there's going to be a few keystones we want to go out and get. Unwavering Stance is just going to be a no-brainer to pick up here, as we're going to have a shield in the first place. You're probably going to hold it up for a little bit too long and get stunned. You'll probably get stunned every now and then anyways, and this just help make melee feel a lot more fluid. Resolute Technique is also going to be a no-brainer. It's going to be in a very good position on the tree, so it'll be very easy for us to pick it up. And because we're not going to be scaling crit for this build, we then will effectively not have to worry about accuracy. We can also go get ourselves Blood Magic, since we're going to kind of be in the area for it with us getting Giant's Blood, and this will allow us to make it so we don't need mana. We just have nothing but life, and because we're most likely to have some pretty good recovery in this build, we really shouldn't worry about all of our skills using our life as our casting resource. And then finally, if you want to play this as a leech build, you could go all the way to the right and get Vault Pact, which would make your leeches be substantially stronger. I personally am not too big of a fan of Vault Pact, but it is something worth considering as a potential maybe for this build. For the other passive nodes you're going to be interested in picking up on the tree, focus on getting attributes and strength, as that'll be how we scale our build, and that's how we'll get a lot more flat damage, and it'll also give us a lot of free flat life, as well as going to the Warcry wheels on the tree and getting any passives that give you increased Warcry speed. Warcry effect will not increase the damage of Corrupting Blood, at least it didn't PoE 1, I don't see why it would in PoE 2, but Warcry speed will increase the effective animation time of the Warcry, and given that we have no cooldown on it, that effectively becomes your attack speed. It would still make the animation faster, meaning your clear shield will feel more comfortable, as you won't have to sit there for a whole second while you watch a character yell. On top of that, getting generic physical damage will be great as well, and it'll scale your Slam's bleed damage, which we'll talk about in the skill section. Any sort of armor nodes are going to be great, as you're going to want to run a lot of armor bases as your gear, meaning that these armor nodes are then going to scale even further. Any sort of life regen nodes along the way can also be pretty good, as that will most likely be your main defensive layer for this build in terms of recovery. And then potentially pick up any sort of damage over time wheels that you see along the way would also be a great benefit to you. Unfortunately, we really don't know many of the passive points on the tree, so I can't tell you exactly what wheels to get, but as long as you pick up generic things that are good for your build, such as fizz damage, bleed damage, strength, and life, you really shouldn't have too many issues. One final thing I'm going to mention here, which we'll get to more in the skill section, is you're going to definitely want to get as much chance to bleed as possible, as we are going to most likely be playing a secondary skill along with this that is going to be used for single target damage on bosses if your corrupting blood damage is enough to kill bosses very quickly. To talk about the gear a little bit more, it's going to be very, very simple in terms of stats we're looking for. Ideally, you're going to want to use armor bases, as we are going to be scaling our armor through a passive tree, and we're going to be running an aura that gives us up to 30% more armor while we are constantly killing enemies. And then for the actual stats, life and generic resistances are always great. And then ideally as much strength as possible on every piece of gear, as not only will that give you more life, but also ramp the damage of your corrupting blood even more. As for your weapon, you're ideally going to look for a weapon with as high of a physical damage roll as possible, as that will increase the damage of the slam you're going to be using, meaning that the bleeds will apply are going to be even bigger. And you don't necessarily need to worry about attack speed on it, as your bleeds don't stack, meaning only one of them will ever do damage at once. And you don't need to worry about any sort of crit rolls, as we're going to be playing Resolute Technique, meaning we can never crit in the first place. So just as high a physical damage as possible is all you really need. Next, let's move on to the spirit skills you're going to want to use in this build. Ideally, you're going to want to use Magma Barrier and Scavenge Plating. You're most likely going to be using the Raise Shield skill on your shield quite a lot as a way to defend yourself from big hits. So this will just give you free endurance charges every time you do that, as well as Scavenge Plating giving you 30% more armor, assuming you're constantly killing enemies, meaning you should feel really good while clearing. And then because we don't really know of many other spirit skills, and we know we're going to have at least about 200 spirit or so by the time we get to endgame, running a blasphemy setup and running 3 of the curses that we know about, Enfeeble, Vulnerability, and Temp Chains, is probably going to be one of the best things you could do with your spirit. Blasphemy will make it so all curses that are linked to it will just be auras around you, debuffing enemies within melee range of you, which is going to be fine given you want to be in melee range anyways. Enfeeble is going to be a nice defensive layer, making enemies do less damage. Temp Chains is going to make them attack slower, which could potentially allow you to kill them before they finish an attack swing on you. And then Vulnerability is going to reduce the armor of the enemies, meaning that your slams, fizz hit will be higher, meaning you're going to be applying bigger bleeds onto bosses. Let's go talk about the skills you're going to want to run for the setup. Our main focus here is going to specifically be our Warcry, as that is going to be the skill that we use for everything but bosses. Again, you have to keep in mind here that we don't know how much damage Corrupting Blood is going to do, but I'm going to go into this assuming that it's not going to do enough single target damage to reliably kill bosses by itself. At the same time, this build isn't going to really work at the beginning. I'm not sure how far into the axe you're going to have to get before you can get this going. You're going to need to wait at least until your second lab at a minimum, so your Warcries don't have a cooldown. And until then, you're most likely going to be playing some other skill, ideally a slam, and then you're going to be focusing on getting 100% bleed chance on it, and then focusing on scaling its fizz damage to apply big bleeds onto enemies. As for the slams that we're going to want to consider, ideally, you're going to want to play Supercharged Slam. This slam just looks really, really strong, where you could channel it to do more damage per second they channeled, which can be bypassed if you're using Warcries, meaning you're just going to do a very large hit, which is all we really care, as the bleed the hit is going to apply is based on if the initial fizz damage was. And we are going to ideally be combining this with Hammer the Gods as well, as Hammer the Gods is just the single highest hitting skill in the game. And what I'm hoping is going to happen is that the bleed generated from Hammer Gods is going to be so large that it by itself will be enough to kill bosses. If it is not, you're going to be able to run Second Wind on it, which is going to give you 2 charges before it goes on its very long cooldown. And if you space out your 2 Hammer the Gods, so the bleeds don't overlap each other, that should hopefully be enough with you spamming a bunch of Warcries to apply your Corrupting Blood onto a boss to kill it. If it's not going to be enough, then you're also going to most likely want to press a few Supercharged Slams to finish off the boss, or just to waste some time until your next Hammer the Gods is ready to go. As for the other supports you're going to want to link onto your slams, both for leveling and once you get towards endgame, Fist of War seems very strong. In PoE 1, it gave you a lot of extra damage and a lot of AoE every few seconds for your next slam, and it's looking to do exactly the same thing in PoE 2. It'll be really good for the extra damage scaling. Pulverize is also going to be a great support here, as we don't care that it's going to reduce your attack speed. You're not going to be attacking that often anyways, and because slams are AoE skills, we'll benefit from the AoE and the area damage. And then finally, bleed support might be really good early game before you get 100% bleed chance from your passive tree or through gear, to always make sure you apply bleed. Finally, there's a lot of supports that deal with armor break, and we are led to believe that is going to be very relevant for all melee builds, meaning that you're most likely going to want to fill in the rest of the slots with as many armor break based supports as possible. Finally, let's talk about the Warcry itself. There are actually quite a lot of supports that make sense to link to your Warcry. Currently, we only know of two Warcries, Seismic Cry and Inferno Cry, and because Inferno Cry really doesn't make sense, we're kind of led to specifically run Seismic Cry. Ideally, no matter what, you are going to be running Hourglass and Brutality along with this. Brutality just gives you more fizz damage, meaning the Corrupting Blow do more damage. And then Hourglass, because we have Great Wolf's Howl, which allows us to ignore Warcry cooldown, means that we get to benefit from the more damage of Hourglass without caring about the increased cooldown of it at all. More duration is also going to be great, as that will make each Corrupting Blood last longer, and because it can stack up to 10 times and you're most likely never going to really get to 10 stacks, this will just allow you to overall ramp it harder than you could without it. And then Executes will make it so your Corrupting Bloods do more damage to enemies that are low life, which should synergize very well with this. Finally, if there's a very easy way for you to generate rage, we unfortunately don't know enough about rage, and there could be some very easy rage generation on the passive tree, you can then run Enrage Warcry, which makes it so your Warcry consumes rage to do more damage. It'd be a great fit in here if it works, but I cannot tell you for certain if there's a very good way for you to generate rage in this build. Finally, if your clear feels good enough and your Corrupting Blood's doing enough, and instead you want more single target damage, based off of what happens with the tooltips in PoE 2, as we currently have two conflicting tooltips on Inferno Cry and Seismic Cry, empowered damage might potentially work, as Seismic currently says exert, but Infernal says empower, which would then give you substantially more damage, effectively giving you a 7th link for your slam if single target damage is the issue that you're running into. With all this put together, I think this build is fairly generic and fairly to the point. You just stack armor, stack strength, and then your bleeds are going to basically do all the work for you. And it all really just comes down to how much damage we could make Corrupting Cry do. Worst case scenario, if Corrupting Cry just can't do enough damage to be relevant, we could just simply remove the supports and just simply play a Supercharged Slam and Hammer the Gods build, and that should be completely fine too, where you kill most things with Supercharged Slam and then use Hammer the Gods on rares or uniques, and I think that'd still make for a pretty strong generic bleed build as a backup in case it's ends up failing. Again, I don't really think this build will necessarily not work out. There's quite a lot of synergies here that make sense, and I think you'll most likely be able to clear. The only thing I've been constantly afraid of while we've been putting this together is the single target damage, but I honestly think Hammer the Gods will probably take care of it by itself. If you have any questions on any of this, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to either explain my train of thought on some of these things or give you any more clarification or help you with any questions. Or you're free to also come by my Twitch, and I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions there. Or if you want to join us for any of the future theory crafting, you're more than welcome to join our community. With that said, I hope you cuties enjoy this build concepts. If this is something that interests you, I hope you have fun with it when PoE 2 launches, and I hope to see you all in the next video.